Section 10 of Gray's Anatomy, Part 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Suzanne Olson. Anatomy of the Human Body, Part 3 by Henry Gray, The Aorta. The aorta is the main trunk of a series of vessels which convey the oxygenated blood to the tissues of the body for their nutrition. It commences at the upper part of the left ventricle, where it is about 3 centimeters in diameter, and after ascending for a short distance, arches backward and to the left side over the root of the left lung. It then descends within the thorax on the left side of the vertebral column, passes into the abdominal cavity through the aortic hiatus in the diaphragm, and ends considerably diminished in size, about 1.75 centimeters in diameter, opposite the lower border of the fourth lumbar vertebra, by dividing into the right and left common iliac arteries. Hence it is described in several portions, viz., the ascending aorta, the arch of the aorta, and the descending aorta, which last is again divided into the thoracic and abdominal aortae. The ascending aorta, aorta ascendens. The ascending aorta is about 5 centimeters in length. It commences at the upper part of the base of the left ventricle on a level with the lower border of the third costal cartilage behind the left half of the sternum. It passes obliquely upward, forward, and to the right, in the direction of the heart's axis, as high as the upper border of the second right costal cartilage, describing a slight curve in its course, and being situated about 6 centimeters behind the posterior surface of the sternum. At its origin it presents, opposite the segments of the aortic valve, 3 small dilatations called the aortic sinuses. At the union of the ascending aorta with the aortic arch, the caliber of the vessel is increased, owing to a bulging of its right wall. This dilatation is termed the bulb of the aorta, and on transverse section presents a somewhat oval figure. The ascending aorta is contained within the pericardium and is enclosed in a tube of the serous pericardium, common to it and the pulmonary artery. Relations. The ascending aorta is covered at its commencement by the trunk of the pulmonary artery in the right auricula, and higher up is separated from the sternum by the pericardium, the right pleura, the anterior margin of the right lung, and some loose areolar tissue, and the remains of the thymus. Posteriorly, it rests upon the left atrium and right pulmonary artery. On the right side, it is in relation with the superior vena cava and right atrium, the former lying partly behind it on the left side with the pulmonary artery. Branches. The only branches of the ascending aorta are the 2 coronary arteries which supply the heart. They arise near the commencement of the aorta, immediately above the attached margins of the semilunar valves. The coronary arteries. The right coronary artery, A coronaria cordis dextra, arises from the right anterior aortic sinus. It passes at first between the conus arteriosus and the right auricula, and then runs in the right portion of the coronary sulcus, coursing at first from left to right, and then on the diaphragmatic surface of the heart, from right to left, as far as the posterior longitudinal sulcus, down which it continued to the apex of the heart as a posterior descending branch. It gives off a large marginal branch which follows the acute margin of the heart and supplies branches to both surfaces of the right ventricle. It also gives twigs to the right atrium and to the part of the left ventricle which adjoins the posterior longitudinal sulcus. The left coronary artery, A coronaria cordis sinistra, larger than the right, arises from the left anterior aortic sinus and divides into an anterior descending and a circumflex branch. The anterior descending branch passes at first behind the pulmonary artery and then comes forward between that vessel and the left auricula to reach the anterior longitudinal sulcus, along which it descends to the incisura apicus cordis. It gives branches to both ventricles. The circumflex branch follows the left part of the coronary sulcus, running first to the left and then to the right, reaching nearly as far as the posterior longitudinal sulcus. It gives branches to the left atrium and ventricle. There is a free anastomosis between the minute branches of the two coronary arteries in the substance of the heart. Peculiarities. These vessels occasionally arise by a common trunk, or their number may be increased to 3, the additional branch being of small size. More rarely, there are 2 additional branches. The arch of the aorta. Arcus aortae, transverse aorta. The arch of the aorta begins at the level of the upper border of the second sternocostal articulation of the right side and runs at first upward, backward, and to the left in front of the trachea. It is then directed backward on the left side of the trachea and finally passes downward on the left side of the body of the fourth thoracic vertebra, at the lower border of which it becomes continuous with the descending aorta. It thus forms 2 curvatures, one with its convexity upward, the other with its convexity forward and to the left. Its upper border is usually about 2.5 centimeters below the superior border to the manubrium sterni. Relations. The arch of the aorta is covered anteriorly by the pleurae and anterior margins of the lungs and by the remains of the thymus. As the vessel runs backward, its left side is in contact with the left lung and pleura. Passing downward on the left side of this part of the arch are 4 nerves. In order from backwards, these are the left phrenic, the lower of the superior cardiac branches of the left vagus, the superior cardiac branch of the left sympathetic, and the trunk of the left vagus. As the last nerve crosses the arch, it gives off its recurrent branch, which hooks around below the vessel and then passes upward on its right side. The highest left intercostal vein runs obliquely upward and forward on the left side of the arch between the phrenic and vagus nerves. On the right are the deep part of the cardiac plexus, the left recurrent nerve, the esophagus, and the thoracic duct. The trachea lies behind and to the right of the vessel. Above are the innominate, left common carotid, and left subclavian arteries, which arise from the convexity of the arch and are crossed close to their origins by the left innominate vein. Below are the bifurcation of the pulmonary artery, the left bronchus, the ligamentum anteriosum, the superficial part of the cardiac plexus, and the left recurrent nerve. As already stated, the ligamentum arteriosum connects the commencement of the left pulmonary artery to the aortic arch. Between the origin of the left subclavian artery and the attachment of the ductus arteriosus, the lumen of the fetal aorta is considerably narrowed, forming what is termed the aortic isthmus. While immediately beyond the ductus arteriosus, the vessel presents a fusiform dilation, which His has named the aortic spindle, the point of junction of the 2 parts being marked in the concavity of the arch by an indentation or angle. These conditions persist to some extent in the adult, where His found that the average diameter of the spindle exceeded that of the isthmus by 3 millimeters. Distinct from this diffuse and moderate stenosis at the isthmus is the condition known as coarctation of the aorta, or marked stenosis, often amounting to complete obliteration of its lumen, seen in adults and occurring at or near, oftenest a little below, the insertion of the ligamentum arteriosum into the aorta. According to Bonnet, this coarctation is never found in the fetus or at birth, and is due to an abnormal extension of the peculiar tissue of the ductus into the aortic wall, which gives rise to a simultaneous stenosis of both vessels as it contracts after birth. The ductus is usually obliterated in these cases. An extensive collateral circulation is set up by the costocervicals, internal mammaries, and the descending branches of the transverse cervical above the stenosis,